Molo Sanbonani, hello, how's it? Shalom, welcome back to the Big Liberty Show, the first show for the year 2020. I have missed you guys. I hope you've been, or rather you enjoyed your summer break and that Christmas and Hanukkah and all thing else was fun and you guys enjoyed the break. Remember, the Big Liberty Show is coming to you every Wednesday in 2020, and the show you can look forward to it coming out at 3 p.m. on YouTube and on Facebook. So make sure you watch and you subscribe, and of course you share the show with your friends. Guys, remember, you can support the work that your favorite fat boy does by becoming a friend of the IRR. This is our crowdfunding campaign, which allows you to essentially throw 90 Rand a month towards the work that we do here, mine, of course, and my colleagues at the Institute of Race Relations. How do you do that, you're wondering? Well, SMS your name to 32823, or you can find us online at irr.org.za/join, and you can just subscribe there for your 90 Rand a month. I have a very interesting episode for you this week. Before I get into that, next week on the Big Liberty Show, a two-part debate on... I'm smiling uncontrollably because it's a really good one. It is communism versus liberty and markets. So that debate had a veritable mix of very interesting characters on it. In-house, of course, who represented the side of liberty, are Mpeake Gameni, a face you are accustomed to from Blacks Only, and another face who you'll see today, Mr. Gabriel Crouse versus Andrew Braukamp. I might be butchering his surname, but I'll let Gabriel correct me once we come back to the show just now. Guys, remember, you can support the show, as I said, by becoming a friend of the IRR. It is super important that you do so. We wholly are dependent on you, our viewers, when it comes to our financial support. And guys, it's 2020. Make this one of your resolutions. So anyway, straight into today's show. Guys, you've been harassing me, so to speak, on social media over the holidays to have a conversation about the economy. Let's begin this year by looking at the state of the economy, and what we project will be some of the key numbers, of course, but the key issues economically that you'll be facing this year. And in studio with me, I have two fellows who you haven't seen in a while, who I'm glad to have on the Big Liberty Show. The Chief Economist, of course, at the Institute of Race Relations, Mr. Cruickshanks. Ian, welcome back to the show. How are you doing?
Thank you. Good to be with you again.
Excellent. And of course, a familiar face. I did make mention of him in my opening segment. Gabriel Crouse, writer and analyst here at the IRR. Gabriel, hello.
How's it, Sihle? That debate we had with the communists.
Yes.
His name is Andrew Crowcamp.
There we go.
I like Brocamp. It shows how friendly you are, even to those whom you mistrust somewhat.
Yes, and hold very interesting ideas. No, not really. But guys, I want us to kick off this year's show. We're going to have just a 20-minute conversation, a lovely, punchy conversation about the economy. People are super worried, and you could almost see it over the holiday period. And I think the numbers out of it, the consumer numbers, will be interesting. I'm looking at you, Ian, out of this. I'm sure we don't have that data set yet, but I'm going to ask you to sort of project it a little bit. It did seem like over the holiday period that things weren't as busy as they usually are from a consumer side of things. Should we be looking towards perky numbers and spending?
Don't fudge around it. Don't say, should we be looking? It's imperative.
Yes.
Didn't seem as busy. They weren't. You just had to go down to any queue in any shopping centre and you got to the front right away.
Yeah.
So clearly there weren't a lot of customers waiting to be served. And what I did notice also, there weren't always people available to do the serving. So from both sides there, costs have been cut down, management has been slimmed down to some extent, and spending power has diminished considerably.
Yeah.
How do we know this for sure? Look at the unemployment numbers. Look at jobs lost. We're not in an environment of creating jobs. We're in an environment where jobs are being destroyed. Everybody knows somebody who has lost their job and can't find another.
Yeah.
That is the significant part. And I think that if there's so little confidence, with business confidence being declining, consumer confidence has followed that, especially with rising unemployment.
Yeah.
Just look at the youngsters, the youth, the 15 to 25-year-old. 60% unemployed. Heck, that just says, and anybody can work that out and say, that says spending power is under huge threat, and what's more, the possible social explosion arising from this is a threat that we can all recognize as part of our potential.
Absolutely. Ian, just very quickly before I go to Gabriel, we sort of headed into this holiday period, and I think it'll speak to the rest of this year perhaps, off of weak numbers in any event.
Yes.
Our last conversation that we had on the show, actually, we were looking at some of the retail numbers which were not looking good back then, industrial numbers not looking good. I mean, it just seemed as if everybody was having a tough time, weren't they?
Yes, all the short-term data that comes out every month or so, has been declined from previous months. And over the year to date, it has been gradually sagging. That's a bad situation to have, and I think that it probably looks like, if we're honest with ourselves, there's nothing to say that trend has changed, and this is the worrying point. So when we even get the World Bank coming along and saying, yes, we've downgraded your growth forecast, but they're still talking about a growth forecast. I think that's being optimistic. I think it's quite possible that we go X growth for a while. And if that happens, it'll be like the early 1990s when there was huge uncertainty about where the country was going. We knew it was going to change drastically. Well, I think we're heading for something similar again.
Gabriel, I'm looking to you now because I want to bring in the politics of this all. At the beginning of every year, the African National Congress, the ANC, usually has its January 8th statement, commemorating, of course, its founding day and blah, blah, blah. This is usually a very sort of gay affair, gale and, wonderful, sort of smokes and mirrors, a dog, like it's usually good times. Full stadiums, This year was different, wasn't it? Yes. They held it in Kimberley. The numbers that statement looked rather paltry, if at best. And there was just not the mood of, hey guys, it's good times, was there?
Yeah, I think in terms of the mood music, not sending out a particularly positive tune, what's troubling to me is that I think that in some ways it's welcome. It would have been great if that had come earlier. I recall when I first joined the Institute of Race Relations, we had a Christmas party and we were having tough times. Some big donors, very irritated with us because of the strong, committed positions that we take, had pulled out. And so our CEO said, we're going to have a Christmas party inside the office, nothing fancy. And that sent a good message, I think. We were happy to be together. We were happy around our core message, but we weren't exuberant and splashing out. And I feel like the ANC could have done that sooner. The problem is that it hasn't, the sort of tone down and exuberance hasn't been met with the accompanying tone up of seriousness about what the problems really are and what we really need to do to address those problems. To stay somewhat abstract, I spoke about it on Friday's Daily Friends show, but to mention it here again for your listeners, I read Sol Plaatje's Native Land Act again over the holidays. I think it really is one of the great books to have come out of this country. It is sort of him going around after the 1930 Native Land Act is passed, recording instances of people's livelihoods falling apart as a result. And he gathers that information up basically to go to London and Westminster, appeal to the King of England and to the Parliament, to the Mother of Parliaments, for them to intervene, because we're still technically a British colony. We've got sort of self-rule status, but the king still oversees us. And he's like, as British subjects, we are being denied the right to due process. We're being denied the right to do business the way that anyone should be allowed to do business. And so please intervene. It's so bizarre to me that the ANC goes back to Kimberley, commemorates at Sol Plaatje's grave, speaks to Sol Plaatje, and yet lives in this universe where, like, Helen Zille's evil for mentioning that there's something good about colonialism, that it had a good positive legacy and a negative legacy. Like, Sol Plaatje is the most imperial colonial dude that there was. His whole mission was to get more colonization, not less colonization.
To literally petition the king.
Yes. And so what's the equivalent of that today? The IMF, I suppose, is the most straightforward equivalent.
Yeah.
We are falling into a debt spiral.
Yes.
We're spending so much money on furnishing our debts. We can't really afford to do it anymore. And we definitely can't afford to do it with revenues decreasing. Every time SARS makes an estimate of what it thinks it can expect to rake in, we've sort of underperformed that. And that feeds a negative cycle as well. with also the foreign equities running away, 120 billion odd last year. It's really not looking good. How do you get yourself out of that situation? Well, you can go rogue and cancel your debts, say we're not going to pay you back. You can steal pensioners' money. You can do prescribed assets.
As it's being mooted, you're right.
As it's being mooted. Or you can go, for example, to the IMF and say, you guys write the budget. You guys decide how big ESCOM should be. You guys decide how we're going to deal with SAA, whether it can fly forever and a day or not. And in exchange, we get to borrow the money to fill the gap. And I think if the ANC was being serious, if they're going to take the chance to be more contained and less exuberant, they must at least be serious, as Sol Plaatje would be serious, and say, maybe we have to start thinking about petitioning the king. Maybe we have to ask for a little bit of an encroachment onto our sovereignty. Why? Because we have screwed up, because the people are suffering, not us, but we are serious enough to acknowledge that we've screwed up, and we want the best possible route out of it. I saw none of that.
And that's the scary part, because and you've put those two things together quite nicely, because I was going to ask you the question, do we feel as though the ANC used this statement to kick off the year, so that an investor listening goes, okay, these guys are serious. Now they're actually beginning to talk the language of necessary reform. And I'm going to come to you on this one very quickly, Ian, because we've been banging this drum, I feel like, on nearly every second episode last year of both the Daily Friend, which was mentioned by Gabriel, and on this show, the desperate need for reform in the economy. There were flashes in the pan, if I can call it that, of the sort of rhetoric in this direction. Remember, we spoke on the show about Tito Mbowene's proposed paper, but it did seem as if the rest of the political elite, if I can call them that, weren't really interested. And this January 8th statement didn't really, if I was an investor, give me a sense of hope that there would be those reforms. Ian, I think the obvious question I want to ask you is, of course we need reform, but what are some of these reforms, as we head into 2020, what are some of these key reforms that are now desperately needed to get the economy going?
First of all, to say, what is the situation? The majority hear, but they don't pay attention. Leadership is in a similar position. They know what's needed, or do they? If they don't know, then they haven't been paying attention, and or perhaps don't understand the severity of it. That's why I think there's not going to be too much change just yet. There's still a groundswell of numbers who say, gee, look at this party we're having, whiskey on tap. I think that as long as that attitude carries on, and it is quite conspicuous consumption carrying on at this birthday bash, and we see it in other forms of government as well, that I think we're not ready to take the huge step of saying, we have failed. We have failed you, the people of South Africa. We have got to go to the IMF. Going to the IMF is admitting that. I don't think the ANC is in that mode yet. And when that comes about, what they'll have to say is, yes, we have not been able to fix Eskom. Well, I'm darn sure they haven't. Eskom's power availability should be 100%. Let's say it should be 90%, 10% down rate. Well, that would be terrible. Where is it now? It's just this recently fallen below 60%. 40% of our generating power is not available. Are we surprised we can't kick the economy into gear? First thing to do would be to make sure that we finish building what is not yet completed, and we stop accepting that it's okay to have unplanned breakdowns.
Yes.
Planned breakdowns. I mean, they're expecting breakdowns. That is part of what they're saying. That is totally unacceptable, and they're still saying it. That means they're not ready to go to the IMF cap in hand yet. And it's got to be a huge change in attitude. We've got to say a lot of our policies haven't worked. This grand socialism, social dream is not working.
Absolutely.
Are we ready for change? The answer is not yet. That is why I think it's going to be we're going to have to accept we'll continue living in our discomfort zone for the foreseeable future. And that can go on for a year or 2 years.
Absolutely.
The longer it goes on, the worse it gets and the longer it takes for the correcting medicine to work.
And Gabriel, I think Ian sets out quite nicely some of those big areas that need immediate attention. Leadership is definitely one of them. Accountability is the other. The idea of being able to say, look, we've actually failed on certain issues, and we might need a bit of international help. We might need to get our act together domestically. But of course, the third one, which is absolutely critical, is the idea that on those certain basics that the economy needs to actually function, in this case you raised ESCOM, super important to get that right. But I want you to narrow it down for us. The top 5 interventions that we must get right as a reform package if we're to kick off 2020.
Okay. Let's start out with we, as in the media and the people who consume media, who sort of are rewarding or punishing people by your choices in terms of information. I just read a piece in the country's most trafficked daily news site by one of its deputy chief editors about Pravin Gordhan, who is got his back against the wall because he's being hounded by Kasatu. So it's a really good piece. He points out that Pravin Gordhan is a pretty clean guy, that he's been hounded by the Guptas, that he's been hounded by the EFF, that there's a lot of race baiting, his Indianness is used against him, and that's all pretty rubbish. And that Ramaphosa hasn't done enough to back him up, and that doesn't help. Okay, but here's what he doesn't say. Pravin Gordhan, or if he says it, he doesn't say it nearly clearly enough. Pravin Gordhan is a socialist to the point of practically being a communist.
Yes.
Pravin Gordhan has refused to countenance the collapse of SAA because he thinks it's some kind of strategic state asset. Pravin Gordhan refused to allow wages at ESCOM to be frozen when Tito Mboweni said we have to freeze wages. Pravin Gordhan has refused to believe Jabu Mabuza, who's now the one who's been forced to resign, because when Jabu Mabuza said ESCOM is 33% overstaffed. So it's very telling when Kasatu pushes. Who is the one that goes between the chairman of ESCOM, Jabu Mabuza, and the Minister of Public Enterprises, Pravin Gordhan? It's the one who was more critical of Kasatu. It's the one who said some of your staff are redundant, some of your staff are not adding value. It's not the guy who's the one who stays, the one that we must now rally around to defend, is the guy who's like, we'll continue to spend the money and we'll find a way to get new money later on. Don't worry about it. And that's just, that's kind of fine if your debt to GDP ratio is 40% or 30%, what it was when Pravin Gordhan first took over as finance minister, and then he doubled it. So it's not like this is a small little thing. It's quite a big and serious thing. More than any other finance minister, Pravin Gordhan has overseen the bulge of the South African debt burden, and he's not doing a great job of dealing with that now. And so, yes, I'm very sorry and very irritated that people are racist towards him. And I'm very irritated that we've had such a corrupt government that, like, the one clean dude in Zuma's era is well, there should have been more, but that's not good enough. Right now, on top of all of that, we need someone who's realistic with the numbers. And for that to happen, the ordinary South African has to ask that question. Is this person being realistic when they're being communicated with? So that's one. That's the big one. It's complicated. Okay, simpler stuff. Expropriation without compensation or anything like it needs to be thrown off the table. If anything, the government can take half of the money that it is spending on Department of Rural Development and Land Reform and spend it on surveying and registering title deeds and long-term leases, giving them to people and leaving them to do their own business and protecting them from scallywags. Number 2, beyond that, I think we need major reform in the education system. The only way that it works is taking the money out of the hands of government, bureaucrats, and sliding it straight through to the parents.
That's
a voucher system. It's just so simple. It's such a simple, brilliant idea. You get the tax collector to take in some money, and some of that does come from rich people who are so well incentivized to sponsor better education for poor South Africans, because that makes everything better. And instead of that money then going through the hands of people who keep 50 cents for every 20 cents that they spend on a child's actual education, it goes to parents who want the best and choose the best. That's number 3. Number 4, I've got to say, ESCOM, SOEs, you need to sell SAA tomorrow. And if you can't sell it, just disband it and sell the parts. ESCOM, I think we need to call the IMF to try and to see if they can do a special deal of, because some of Eskom's debt is particular to Eskom.
Yeah.
So if we're too worried to let go of the whole sovereignty of the nation, say, well, can the IMF please consider helping us service Eskom's debt, and exchange the IMF becomes the board of Eskom? It's a simple idea. I don't know why Business Day doesn't like touting it, but that would be a good idea for me for that.
Just hang on. I want to play the devil's advocate here. On your fourth point, and I'll let you get to the fifth one, the fifth intervention.
Yeah.
A lefty listening to you might then say, "Oh, but no, hang on, Gabriel, you're just being a reactionary right winger, and you haven't thought this through. Because if you just scrap these SOEs, then what about the jobs? What about that extra 30% of oversubscribed individuals employed at Eskom? What about the poor in that regard? What happens to those individuals?"
Sihle, there is no such thing as a free lunch.
Yes.
When you've made a mistake, then you're going to pay a price. It's going to hurt. Someone is going to be hurt. Okay. So anecdotally, here's an interesting story. Last year around this time, first week of school, the big story of the opening week of schools, Schweizer Reinecker, large school Schweizer Reinecker is racist.
Yes.
This has been decided by everyone in advance of knowing why it's racist, okay? Then some silly fools, journalists, whatever, me, some others, we decide to go and ask some questions. We ask some teachers. We go to Schweizer Reinecker and we discover that the black parents, white parents, everyone's very happy with these teachers. They're doing the best job that they can. Along the way, I'm walking around the fields trying to see, I don't believe anyone. So I'm trying to see something that's going to show that these parents are lying to me or something. And there I see a group of 4 people drinking in a car under a tree next to a field by Law School Schweizer Reinecker, Word School Schweizer Reinecker actually. And one of them was one of the most stylish young people I've ever seen. He must have been 25 years old. He had Nike ticks on each of his front teeth in gold.
Oh.
And he was very suavely dressed, and it was a Friday afternoon, and they were gathering to commemorate a friend of theirs had died. And they came from different parts of the Northwest Province. They'd come a long way to come back to where they went to school to commemorate this person's death. By the way, this dude with the teeth happened to be colored. Okay. So I think, I don't know, it's hard to say these days. Maybe I shouldn't have said it, but anyway.
But no one's going to whip out a pencil here, please.
Yes. So, but the point of it is that he and I struck up a bit of a rapport, and we conversed, and he was very interested in what I was doing. Turns out he's working at Eskom.
Oh.
Turns out last year, I said, "But aren't you worried?" He said, "Of course I'm worried. Every month I go to another job interview. Every month I come up with a new business idea for the day that my retrenchment comes, that I can not be caught flat-footed."
Yeah.
I said, "Are you the only one like that?" He says, "No, in my office where we work in that branch of Eskom in Northwest Province, I would say 1/5 of us are like that." And so people are seeing it coming. The worst thing that can happen at Eskom is that the people who get retrenched are the guys like him, the most excited, exuberant guys in a way, because then all you're left with is the most dreary dudes who can't find a job anywhere else. But the point is that people working at Eskom are seeing it coming. Some of them are looking for better jobs. And if you are in a position where you can't add value because everything is so corrupt and gummed up around you, it's very hard to have a meaningfully positive life. And this is what he was saying to me was, at some point I started looking at it. Wasn't because I thought I might lose my job. It's because I thought, right now, am I really happy with what I'm doing? Because half of the month, I'm not sure that I'm actually making it. When I wake up and I go to sleep at night, I'm not sure that I've done something that day that warrants what I'm getting out of it. So, yes, there's no such thing as a free lunch. Some people are going to suffer, but if it's done right, the people who get retrenched are the least productive people, i.e. people that have already been getting money from the government for less value than they're adding. And hopefully they can use that to find a new path forward. And generally, if the economy gets more efficient, that means there's more money sloshing around for everything, including social grants, to support those people who can't actually make a way for themselves.
Or even retraining opportunities for them to find.
Best way.
Gabriel, I did disturb your train of thought.
Yes, number 5 is the most important one. This is huge. 2020 has got to be the year, in my opinion, that we look back. 2020 vision is retrospect. We look back at what's been since 1994, and we say, some people say BEE was never a good idea. Some people say BEE is forever. The second group who say BEE is forever, that is what a fascist says. So we must all debate, when should BEE end? Maybe you can say in 2 years. Maybe you can say this year. Maybe you can say 5 years ago. But we must have that concrete debate. And by the end of this year, it must be resolved. When is BEE going to end? I say it can't end soon enough. Because
Correct.
right now, especially poor people in this country need every drop in this economy to be squeezed out productively, effectively. And that means getting rid of everything that's not about maximum efficiency.
Absolutely. Fellas, I have run out of time. I'm really, really sorry. But we'll definitely have this conversation on an ongoing basis because, as Ian always says, paraphrasing another famous quote, it is about the economy, stupid. And fellas, thank you so much for joining me. Of course, that's Ian Cruickshanks, the Chief Economist at the Institute of Race Relations, and Gabriel Crouse, a writer and analyst here at the IRR. Guys, there you have it. You heard it yourselves. I really encourage you to drop a comment at the end of this video. What did you think about this conversation? Are we really, as a country, heading in that direction where we'll see the sort of necessary reforms that are required to get the economy going? Or, like me, are you super worried about the state of things and perhaps just how we're not going to change so long as we have the same crop of, socialist, communist type politicians who see nothing wrong with what's happening at the moment? Guys, drop me a comment at the end of this video. I really look forward to your engagement. Share this video as widely as possible. And remember, support the work that I do as we look towards a 2020 of really awesome comment. Again, I say thank you to my guests on the show. Thank you for watching. And remember, never trust the commie.